Hey everyone, welcome back to Polarify Horizons, the podcast where we explore the shifting frontiers of business, technology, and geopolitics. Today's episode takes us straight to the heart of the global economic chessboard. We're in the middle of a new kind of trade war. But this time, it's not just about tariffs and trade balances, it's about power, currencies, security, and strategy. Our jumping-off point today? A compelling piece by economist and former Treasury advisor Stephen Moran titled, A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. It's not just a policy paper, it's a blueprint for how the U.S. might redraw the global trade map under the pressures of currency misalignment, reserve obligations, and national security concerns. From the Triffin dilemma to strategic tariff layering, Moran argues that the U.S. is bearing an unsustainable burden and that it might be time to flip the script. We'll unpack what's unfolding on the world trade stage, whether you're a policy buff, a global strategist, or just trying to understand why prices keep shifting and who's really footing the bill. This episode's for you.
Welcome everyone. Let's dive into a discussion on reshaping the global trading system. The idea here is that the persistent overvaluation of the dollar, driven by inelastic reserve demand, is really at the heart of America's trade imbalances and manufacturing woes.
I'm with you. So this overvalued dollar makes U.S. exports less competitive and fuels a trade deficit, right?
Exactly. Because the dollar stays strong, U.S. imports stay cheap while our manufacturing takes a hit. The analysis explores how tariffs might be used to counterbalance that, especially if currency adjustments, like a depreciation, offset the tariff impacts on prices.
So tariffs versus currency policy, is it a choice between directly taxing imports or using shifts in the exchange rate to balance prices?
Yes, it's kind of like, using a two-pronged approach. Tariffs can, on one hand, raise revenue and curb imports if foreign currencies don't adjust. But when the currency moves appropriately, say a 10% depreciation offsetting a 10% tariff, prices for importers remain nearly unchanged.
Yeah, true. But isn't there evidence that in microdata the tariff cost sometimes does pass through to consumer prices, affecting margins?
Well, yes, there's a debate here. Macro-level data from the 2018-2019 trade war indicated minimal inflation because of currency offset, yet some micro-studies show full pass-through on importer prices. It really depends on how completely the exchange rate effects trickle through to final retail pricing.
Interesting. And then there's the whole concept of the Triffin dilemma. The idea that as the U.S. supplies reserve assets globally, our strong dollar becomes a double-edged sword.
Absolutely. The Triffin world theory posits that surging demand for dollars forces an overvalued currency, which in turn erodes export competitiveness and undermines manufacturing, even while lowering borrowing rates and enhancing financial power for national security purposes.
So linking trade policy with national security becomes crucial. Trump's proposals really aim to retool this mix, don't they?
Exactly. His approach leverages tariffs not only to extract revenue, but also serve as negotiation tools, potentially driving multilateral currency adjustments, something some even call a Mar-a-Lago accord, to coordinate a fairer exchange rate.
Right. Bold. But isn't there a huge risk of market volatility when you start tinkering with currencies and reserves?
Yes, indeed. The plan suggests gradual implementation. For instance, ramping up tariffs gradually. The idea is to avoid sudden shocks that might trigger excessive exchange rate swings or alarming market reactions.
I get that. But I'm a bit skeptical. Won't unilateral actions like imposing fees on foreign reserve holdings scare off investors and possibly invite retaliatory measures?
That's a valid challenge. The proposed guide clearly differentiates unilateral versus multilateral measures. Unilateral steps, like using IEEPA to levy user fees, are riskier and could trigger volatility, whereas coordinated actions with allies can mitigate some of those adverse impacts.
And on the tariff side, using them to raise revenue and reallocate burdens seems almost like a built-in fiscal tool, shifting costs to those whose currencies weaken in response.
Exactly. It's like a double-edged sword. Tariffs, if offset by currency moves, can preserve consumer purchasing power while effectively taxing foreign exporters through reduced real income. That revenue could help ease America's burden of providing global security.
And at the same time, it forces a rethinking of our trade relationships, essentially redefining who's inside or outside the U.S. security umbrella.
Right, that's a key insight. It introduces a demarcation where friends, foes, and neutrals face different tariff and currency policies. This, in theory, would bolster domestic manufacturing and even reconfigure international partnerships.
So, in the big picture, the sequence might be implement strategic tariffs to secure revenue and leverage, then carefully introduce currency adjustments when market conditions permit.
Absolutely. The plan envisions an initial phase where tariffs help rebalance trade, followed by calibrated currency policies to correct the overvalued dollar, ideally without sparking runaway inflation or market chaos.
Fascinating stuff. It's a complex interplay of trade policy, fiscal tools, and national security considerations, all aiming to reindustrialize America.
Yeah, it's like, orchestrating a delicate dance. While the theory promises long-term gains for American competitiveness, the execution has to be extremely precise to avoid volatility.
Certainly a high-stakes balancing act. Thanks for unpacking these tough concepts. It really sheds light on how deep and layered these policy choices are.
Absolutely. It's a web of economic theory and real-world policies. Understanding these nuances is essential for those monitoring market risks and global economic shifts.
For sure. I'm eager to see how these ideas evolve and influence future trade negotiations and international alliances.
Me too. Watch this space. It's a compelling roadmap for reconfiguring global trade, albeit with many moving parts and potential pitfalls.
Cheers to that insight and to following how theory translates into practice here. Thanks for the deep dive today.